and welcome to another episode of I Survived Youth Group in the 90s. I am, of course, your host, Scott, and with me, as always, is the ever-amazing Caleb. Caleb, what's going on?
Your intros to me are getting more and more generous. It's almost like I've been going through a crisis in the last month, and I've been really struggling. You're just trying to encourage me, and I really appreciate it.
It's very, passive Minnesotan of me to not engage with, an actual support of you and encouragement of you, and just kind of say it in a different way. You're doing great. You're amazing.
Just so we're all clear, it's not a big crisis. It's been fine. There's been changes going on in my life, and I am really good with change. And you've been very supportive because I've needed to be able to say, "Hey, I can't do this right now," so you've been very supportive.
Well, you've been amazing. How nice is this?
All right, thanks for tuning in, everybody.
That's right.
Just if you don't want to hear us gush over each other, that's what the next 5 minutes is going to be.
That's right.
Let's talk about your hair next.
That's
Scott.
right. Get a room, you guys. So we're back to talk about the experience growing up as youth group kids in the 90s and how that has shaped our adult lives. We'll talk to friends about their faith journeys spanning from the 90s to today and discuss current cultural topics through the lens of someone who grew up during that era. Caleb, we have yet again another returning guest for this episode. Who we chatting with?
Yeah, so your cousin DJ, we did an interview with him, and then he returned to talk about the topic of education. So we thought it would be another topic that is relevant today in that, education is obviously something we're all raising children, but also trying to kind of do a little compare and contrast from the 90s school experience for 90s youth group kids versus what, kind of some of the buzzwords around education are today.
Mm-hmm. So if people might remember back to our interview with DJ, he is my cousin, of course, so I've known him for a very long time. You've also known him in different capacity because you both homeschool your kids.
Yep.
But maybe not for the reasons that a lot of people homeschool their kids. And so this topic kind of ended up on the list. It's look, I went to public school. I do send my kid to public school. I'm fortunate enough to live in a place where the public school is highly rated, very reliable. We love it very much. Whereas, you guys have, for other reasons, have been homeschooling your kids. So it was, we get both sides of that coin. And DJ, as always, is very thoughtful and articulate. So it was kind of the perfect guest to have. What do you kind of remember about the conversation?
I thought it was a great conversation. We kind of went through our experience, which I thought was really interesting. Thinking about, we've talked with a lot of people about their youth group experience, but it was kind of interesting to take that youth group experience and then put it into what did that look like in your public school experience? Because our experience was very different than his, and we'll get into it into the show, but within the show, but because of our friend group being at our high school and less of his youth group friend group being at his high school, his experience in public education was much different than ours. And so we kind of shared a couple of stories about, that experience and how that felt different. And I thought that was really, really interesting. And again, it leads to me even thinking about are there other regular questions we could ask people about what did your youth group experience? How did it bleed into your education experience? Because for us, it had a big impact. For him, a little different experience. And so that was interesting to digest. And then we tackled some buzzwords. I said it before. I think education has become I don't want to say a hot button topic, but it has become a much more heated topic. Like every topic, it's become a much more heated topic than it was, I think, 30 years ago. And so again, it was kind of diving into some of the things we see and kind of some of the things we see around in our culture. And then, we just talked about our personal experiences. We all have children. We've all made educational decisions. You alluded to it. Both DJ and my families homeschool, and your son goes to public school, and just kind of how that works. So it was really interesting to get a couple different perspectives on thing. And again, it made me think about who else could we talk about this? Because I'm sure there'd be so many people would have a ton of insightful things to say about this topic in particular. Sorry, I went on there for 20 minutes.
What? Huh? Oh,
Longest intro
I was napping.
Ever.
I was napping. I take back my amazing comment earlier.
Yeah, you should.
I think people will find that you and DJ do the homeschool thing for reasons they may not expect, and perfectly valid, of course. Anybody who wants to homeschool their kid has valid reasons to do so. But you're right. Current cultural feelings about education are pretty volatile right now. We're recording this post-election, so who knows when this episode comes out. Maybe it'll be even more volatile.
Right.
But we also went to school, lived in a pretty, a blue state that had a lot of funding for public education.
Yeah.
It's not the same across different states. And so I would be curious out there if we have listeners who, didn't grow up in a pretty effective public school setting, how they felt about it. And maybe that's how they've changed their opinions moving forward here. But that all being said, it is something that is a little, maybe a little unique to Christian culture, having a lot of homeschool communities around. And how did that grow out of, what we were doing in the 90s is kind of what we try and tackle with this episode.
I don't know if it came up on the episode, but at one point, a former pastor of mine once said we were the weirdest homeschool family he's ever met. And I think DJ's family would fall in line with that as well, that we're not the typical homeschool families in some respects, but in some respects, my family falls into a pretty still normal homeschool communities. But yeah, it's different reasons. And so that was a lot of the conversation, was not a lot, but there was a bit of conversation around homeschool. So, buckle up for that.
Let's not give away the entire episode.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. I'll edit that all.
At any rate, thank you very much for listening. We hope you enjoy. DJ, thank you, of course, for joining us again. If you do, I think, Caleb, you had to edit out some yawns. We were recording that pretty late at night, so if we get kind of sleepy or monotone, we apologize, but we're trying to get that done. So, at any rate, thank you very much for listening, and we hope you enjoy.
I want to break in and quickly remind everyone that the views and opinions expressed on this episode of I Survived Youth Group in the 90s may not be held by or even approved of by everyone appearing on this episode. One of the goals of this show is to give everyone a safe space to share their opinions and thoughts on deeply personal matters of faith. We are not looking to start an argument, but instead we want to let people share how they feel. During our interviews and discussions, we may not represent every point of view on a given subject, and we understand that this may be frustrating at times, but it is the nature of a podcast discussion with a limited amount of time. We also know and want to acknowledge that our memories of events that happened 25 to 30 years ago may not be 100% accurate. We assume everyone's best intentions as they share how they remember the experience of their youth. Now, back to the show.
All right, we are joined tonight again with my cousin DJ. He's back to talk to us about a subject that is near and dear to all of our hearts, along with myself and Caleb.
Wait, I'm sorry, near and dear to our hearts.
Yep, it is public
school. I don't
school.
think that's true at all.
No, nope.
Hey, education.
Education. Thank you. Thank you very much. Keep it on track. Keep it on track, buddy. We thought we'd get a guest on here to talk about a topic, which we haven't done in a little bit. And so all three of us went to public school, and we each graduated mid-90s 1 year after each other. Am I right about that?
I'm a 2000, so I just cracked.
Oh, you're 2 years after
Just
me.
cracked the new decade. Yeah,
Yep,
two
there
after
you go.
you. Yep.
So you're my sister, same as my sister. My sister is 2000 as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was 98. So right around that late 90s era. And what we thought we'd talk about tonight is just like the Christian perception of public school. It's become more and more of an issue even now, of course, like everything. What does that mean for us as parents? Because we all have kids who are in school at the moment. So let's start from the beginning. Like, describe our experience growing up in public school. Caleb, you and I went to Woodbury High School together. What are some things you about not just like Christianity in school, but just school in general? What was your impression of going to public school?
We held education in high regard. My mom's a teacher, and my sister would go on to be a teacher. My grandfather was a the superintendent of Rochester schools at one point. So education was a really important thing in our household. So like the idea of going to a public school was like something that was, I think my parents held that in very high regard. My dad got himself out of poverty by kicking ass in high school because he was poor, and he got an academic scholarship to the U of M. And so education was something that was really valued, and public education was something that was really valued. So for me, the perception was this is good, this is what you do, and there's value here. So that's like going way back to the roots of it. That is where it was for me. So going to school just had that casing around it.
DJ, how about you?
Yeah, same. It was basically taken for granted. I mean, go like public education, that it was completely normative in my family. Pretty good, decent public school system. I don't remember there being anything outside of just the expectation of like moving through the school system in my city, and that being taken seriously, and have good expectations around giving it your best at school. And I and my younger brothers, we're all involved in different activities, especially by high school. We each kind of had our niche, whether it was music or sports, and it was just very straightforward.
Yep.
I mean, private school was never never in the cards. I don't know if my parents would have even considered that, but it was just like, this is good education, and you're going.
So maybe there's a little bit of benefit from our experience, because we did live in places and go to schools that were good public schools, right? They weren't.
Yeah, pretty objectively, I would say. Yeah.
I lived in St. Paul up until through third grade. And then fourth grade, I was out in Woodbury. And in the St. Paul magnet school that I went to, I was in the upper echelon of reading class. I was in the advanced reading class. I got out to Woodbury in fourth grade, and I was immediately put in the dumb kids reading group, which I was in the first 2 rows on the right-hand side of the room, because we were the kids who couldn't read so well. And so immediately, like, that was a eye-opening transition even for my parents. Was, in St. Paul, I was one of the advanced readers. Got out to Woodbury, and why are your kids so slow? Why?
So there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah, no kidding. There's a lot of reasons behind that. No, maybe it's a little bit easier for us and good for us to realize up front, like, hey, our public school experience was probably maybe a little easier or better than others because we were in good school systems, right? People who don't necessarily have that ability or advantage, maybe a non-public school option is a better option for those reasons.
Definitely.
For me, the school thing was very front and center because I moved back overseas just as I was starting high school. So I missed that whole middle school experience that everyone had. I have these weird non-memories. Like, everyone has seen Goonies, but I've not seen Goonies. Like, it's all these little things that...
Wait. Is this your 9th grade self hasn't seen Goonies, or you still haven't seen Goonies?
I still haven't seen Goonies.
What?
I know.
How is that possible?
I don't know.
Haven't you had cable at some point in your life?
I watch a lot of movies. I know the Hey You Guys thing, but like I don't know.
Okay, interesting. Interesting fact about Scott.
Yeah.
You never saw Titanic either, or something. What else are you going to reveal
I
here?
saw that one 10 times. No.
I didn't see Titanic till I was like 35.
There you go.
I made it a long time.
So I missed a significant part of like school, and when I was overseas, I did go to a private international school because I couldn't speak French, so I wasn't going to go to a public school. So I kind of had both of those experiences, but similarly, it was never like public school is bad, but this is all we got. That was never part of it. It was just like, hey, you're expected to go to school. You're expected to do well in school because it's a good opportunity and it's a gateway to many other things. So don't waste it. How about what did faith look like for us then in our public school setting? Like, how were we acting it out? And I'll transition this with a little story we mentioned way, way back. at the beginning of this podcast, which was we would try to invite kids, and we didn't have the gumption to invite strangers or the cool kids. So we would just take signs that we printed off and pin them or tape them to our backpack. And it would be like, this weekend, barf night, 7 p.m., come along, that kind of thing. I don't know if anybody ever responded to those, but like we were trying to be part of in there and without being too overt about it. Another thing, and Caleb, you might remember this, but we would always sit together at a table before school started, before the first bell rang. So we'd get there, we'd all find our youth group friends. A few of the people that we've already talked to were there. And I don't know whose idea it was, but after a while of doing that, we decided at that first, and everybody was in the cafeteria at the same time, right? Just waiting to get in school. Caleb's smiling.
You get through it because I'm remembering this very differently.
Okay,
so this
please.
is going to be fun.
The bell would ring, and someone had the idea that at first bell, we would stand up and we would hold hands there and we would say a prayer for that day, right? I don't know, 8 to 10 kids of us standing around the table and then everyone else walking by us. And I remember one of our friends in that group got either embarrassed or really mad and quoted a verse about saying your prayers in private, that sort of thing, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, no, we got to do it. We got to do it. We got to be a witness, blah, blah, blah. So, again, trying to be a little influential in high school was tough. Caleb, what is your memory of that?
So I don't remember it being in the lunchroom. I remember it being around my locker because I had a locker it was always, we always met around my locker. At least for 1 year, I think we switched lockers, but because I had a locker that was in kind of a main junction, and so it was either my locker or your locker where we met, and then we would all hang out there in the hallway. I remember it being in the hallway, and maybe it switched my senior year. I wasn't there, or I'm sorry, your senior year I wasn't there, so maybe you guys switched locations, because I do remember one of my most vivid memories of standing up and showing faith in high school was that event. We were standing around. Do you remember? I'm going to try not to have this be an out of control story. Do you remember the girl from, I think she was from Newport, who got hit on Highway 61 and died? She went to Cottage Grove, but a whole bunch of people at both schools knew her because Cottage Grove, Park High School, and Woodbury High School were rivals, but they were really sister schools in a lot of ways.
Yep.
A lot of people went back and forth. We had people from Park in our youth group in Woodbury. And I think she went to Park and she got hit by a car on Highway 61, crossing Highway 61 and died. No. And we were at school the next day after she had died. And it was our little locker. We were going to do our prayer thing again. It was my turn to pray. It was my day. And I started praying. I was praying about that situation. And I vividly remember this. I got done praying. I said amen. I lifted my head and the hallway had stopped moving. And people had pulled in around our little group of prayer. And I do remember that being a very powerful moment that people clearly saw us praying in the hallways. And I remember that day in particular, I think it meant something to the people around us at the very least of that there was some comfort to be had in that because the hallway had stopped and there was kind of this collective kind of listening in on our prayer as we prayed about that situation. So I remember that one really, really distinctly. I think it was my junior or senior year. Oof. I remember that one really, really vividly. So,
Oof. Wow, what a memory. Well, I guess you were doing more good than I thought. DJ, what about you? Like, how were you playing out your faith in high school?
Yeah, I'm impressed that you all had time to do something before the first bell in high school because I was only ever rolling in like just in time and for first class, which I was a band nerd. And we were on a block schedule, so 4 classes a day, band every single day, first period, all 4 years of high school. So I spent an entire, like 25% of my high school experience was in band. And so like, I was rolling in just in time for band first thing in the morning. And I didn't have anything like that. And I think my situation was a little different because I was going to high school in basically like the next suburb over from where my church was.
True.
Which drew then naturally from that community quite like definitely majority in terms of like where people lived and went to school. And there was people from all, other cities nearby and whatnot. But like my high school was very underrepresented in my youth group. There was just a couple of us that were friends. And so when I was at school, it was such a different dichotomous kind of experience for me because I wasn't seeing my youth group friends at school during the day, just a couple of them. And so I didn't really have like my Christian friends at school where we're doing things. I remember being it's kind of betrays actually, I think, if what in looking back on it, like how complicated and deeply held those beliefs really were. Because on the one hand, with that really strong evangelical mindset, if you believe that truly and deeply, it's like dire, for everybody to know this good news that and yet it's so hard.
Yeah.
Like at the same time, so it's like it's a weird it's funny to think back on that. Like, is that kind of like a tell? But it's so
Mm,
hard to actually then tell people about it. So I was pretty passive, I think,
mm,
in the way that I demonstrated my faith. I wore lots of Christian band shirts that nobody knew what that meant.
yeah.
Sometimes the shirt had like a Bible verse on it if it came from my youth group or something. I remember doing "See You at the Pole." Did y'all do "See You at the
Oh, yes.
Oh
Good
yeah.
Pole"?
call. Good pull on that for sure.
That was probably my biggest, most overt demonstration, and I always found it so hard and so like awkward.
Mm.
And it's really interesting to think back on that. Like I felt very strongly about my beliefs, and yet conversely, as a teenager navigating high school, I found it very awkward to be praying at the flagpole one day here before school,
Hmm.
Like what was that? What was actually going on there? It's tricky. So I, yeah, the other I just tried to be like some kind of standout kid by not swearing and not getting into mischief and whatnot. And
Not partying. Yeah.
yeah, no parties.
No parties.
We also had a prayer group before, like it was like on Thursday mornings. There was another prayer group that was like more a bunch of the youth groups coming together. And I remember because Dave was always there and he wasn't a part of our youth group, but we were all
Right.
connected to him.
Right.
So I remember there was a couple different things going on at our high school.
Yeah, I remember Young Life being at our high school and doing stuff like after
Hmm.
school or something in the
Mm.
cafeteria. And I meant, oh, Young Life, yeah, okay. That's not real. So judgmental. Yeah.
You too, huh?
Uh,
See You at the Pole is still a thing. It is
is
September
it?
25th. So it's like 2 weeks from tomorrow, or a couple days from
Wow.
now, or yeah, in a few weeks. So,
Behind the curtain, depending on when this episode is released.
Yeah. Get your WWJD bracelets back out, y'all.
dude, talk. That's a whole other episode. I think I forgot about those. Talk about markers if you're a Christian or not.
Oh yeah, that was the other one.
Yeah. So DJ, maybe for you it was like you didn't have the group context to like we did, because we were if I was gonna hang out with somebody at school lunch or whatever, it's gonna be these guys, these high school
Right. Yeah,
people.
you had like a critical mass of people there, which
Yeah.
it's interesting to hear about that because that was a different experience than I had.
Yeah. So part of the reason we want to talk about this topic is we've come to know and understand as adults now with kids who are in middle school, high school, that the choice to send kids to public school is can be contentious, and there's lots of different policies around that are happening across the country. So we thought, that would be part of the reason to dive in. Why do we think that people choose to send their kids to, like, what are the reasons they would send a kid to public school? What are the reasons they would send their kid to a private school or homeschool them? Like, I'll give you an example. For my life, I work in real estate, and it is it is early September. School just started. A lot of people move in August, and one of the primary things they look for is the school system, right? They want to move. That's why I'm at where I live where I live. That's why a lot of people choose to move to different spots is what school can I put my kids into? And so it is an important family community function.
Mhm.
So this choice is very important. Why do you think people make the choice to send their kids to certain schools?
I think my perception going back a ways, when you think about private school, I tend to think about, I mean, obviously there's, I'll say, maybe say privilege. I mean, circumstances can be a lot. But if you're paying for school and you have the means to do so, I think for most of my life I've tended to see that as kind of a like an educational or maybe a sport-based or activity-based choice. Like that
Mm,
school offers something that's even next level. And if you're able to do that, you're going for that. Whereas, and like the choice to go to public school for so many is like that's just what's available. And in where we live,
hmm
public education is it's on a spectrum for sure, but it is in the United States, mostly and available and is the expectation, in fact, like the law. And
hmm
if you have children, that's the educational system that is available. And so and sometimes there isn't. And if you don't like your school, like that's where a lot of privilege comes in, right? Is like if you don't have the ability to make a different choice around education, your neighborhood school is what you get.
hmm
And of course, there's lots of inequity and disparity in our education system that, we could unpack with that. But
hmm
these days, though, now it seems like so many of the choices around different methods for doing school is more about, I don't know exactly how, it's about like content. I
mm.
don't, it's about culture and curriculum and what's being taught. It seems like that's where school choices in our current, public discourse has become more about that
Mm.
than maybe something purely educational.
Mm.
That's just my perception.
So a little bit of like, I don't want my kids to be in that context or that culture. I want them
Yep.
to be in this culture for various reasons.
Right. Yep.
Or I don't want them to be learning this. I want them to be learning
Yeah.
that, or at least have that filter on their
Yeah.
education.
And certainly people are making all kinds of decisions still about education and, if they're able to do like a private school scenario for like a whole host of other reasons that are like totally neutral. But
hmm
yeah, I think that's where it's changed.
Not to just, I did this on another episode where I just jumped right in. It was with Alex. I just jumped right in and just threw the elephant in the room
Do it.
out there. The word that has become, I think, so ingrained with the school decision conversation in the last, and I feel like in the last 5 years, it has become the word is indoctrination. That has
Mm.
become the word
Mm.
now that is tied to so many people's decisions about school. And, disclosure, I've said it before, we homeschool our kids. So we are definitely connected with a lot of homeschool families. And we have seen a change in the homeschool community in the last since COVID. I'm just going to say it since COVID.
Hmm.
COVID changed the homeschool landscape, and the word indoctrination now has become for a lot of Christians that the school is indoctrination. And so I'm choosing where I'm doing my indoctrination, whether I'm doing it at home, in a private setting, or the public sector. And I'm way oversimplifying, but that is the word that now jumps out when it comes to this decision of why in the last 5 years that I feel like has become so prevalent and so much a part of the conversation.
Mm.
Hmm. Yeah, and we also are a homeschool family. And I think in a lot of ways, you just say homeschool. There's stigma attached to that or stereotypes,
hmm
and we don't resemble any of that. I would say, certainly in terms of the reasoning why. I mean, we have kids that they have complex needs educationally, and I mean, and that's a choice that not everybody can make too. It's like to have
mm.
a life that's structured around having a parent, whose primary responsibility it is to do like education, outside of traditional school context.
hmm
Not everybody can make that choice to accommodate the needs of their kids or to, do something different for whatever reason you're choosing. I like for us, I feel like I'm regularly needing to like self-define our family, beyond what somebody is going to assume is true about us because we
Mm-hmm.
do school at home. It's just so much more complicated than that. Yes, I like Caleb, you kind of, I mean, we're connected to like just lots of like fantastic people, by being a homeschool family, by, you run with different groups because your life just orbits differently, the schedules of a lot of the people around you. So you end up in, these groups and activities, and they're like just great people, and like I know that people are making decisions to do school the way they're doing for reasons that I wouldn't agree with, but that I still like them. You know what I mean? And like they probably don't understand why we're maybe doing it for certain reasons, but
Mm-hmm.
that has become a very interesting because I think we all went to public school. I'm trying to think of anybody that I knew that was homeschooled, like from my youth group.
Oh
I
yeah.
don't, I mean, I think there was even more stigma attached to homeschool then because, I think I've heard enough people who are now like well into their adulthood be like, yep, I was homeschooled, and it's kind of like, yep, I know what you're thinking.
Yeah.
Um,
Let me explain.
yeah, yeah, like, yeah, but so, I mean, obviously it's been around for a long time, but there's a number of other things attached now, that
Mm-hmm.
are very complex.
Caleb, thoughts?
I like how you try and you made the comment about like people making assumptions, and that's so true. Like my favorite is the assumptions that people make when they find out we're homeschooled, and we've had a couple people just in situations over the last 5 years where they find out we're the homeschooled, and then they launch right into conversations that I'm super uncomfortable with. I'm
Mm.
like, no, no, I actually don't think that that senator is the devil incarnate. I'm just not
Right.
there, sir.
Yeah.
But thank you for inviting me to your church. See you
Sir,
later.
this is a Wendy's.
Yeah, exactly.
You just walked by my house. Who are you?
I think you're right. There's a little bit of that context of like 90s, 2000s homeschool. Certain, what do I know? But it's probably way, 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 way different. When I was post college working in the bookstore before I got into my current career, there was a lady, her job was to get that homeschool curriculum into the store
Oh
because
yeah.
Christian families would go there to buy it. And she
Hmm.
homeschooled her kid, and her kid worked there also. And I'll never forget. It's not like I had seen a crossdresser very often, but a crossdresser came to the store, and I was like, okay, cool, whatever. It's not, you're not expecting it, but just help them out.
Welcome.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. And this kid who had homeschooled just lost her mind as if an alien had come for literally she had watched an alien drop out from a spaceship in front of her. She couldn't handle it. And I was like, oh. And I, unfairly or not, I did relate that to her homeschool upbringing. It's probably not a fair assumption, but I was like, there's a
You're
little
not
bit of a
wrong
bubble here.
in assuming.
Yeah.
Yeah. I regularly feel the need to say, like, I totally believe in public education. I mean,
Hmm.
I think that's like baseline. That's the thing. Like our family, like we've utilized it to some extent, are currently homeschooling, like totally believe in it. And, for like only speaking for me and my family, we are not, like we could talk about school these days because it's not all like fantastic.
Hmm.
And there's, now as we have kids navigating different school situations, like there are some different challenging things, but I still support it. Like I'm still happy that my tax dollars are going to my local schools,
Hmm.
even though, we don't, actually get the most of the benefit of
Benefit.
that. Like that's perfectly fine with me. I believe in the system. Like we've made a different choice for very specific reasons, and
Hmm.
as you can tell, I feel the need to defend that.
Right. Be very clear about it.
Uh-huh.
Sure. What do you think it is about the indoctrination aspect that's kind of risen in the last few years? In Christian circles and non-Christian circles, it's not just homeschooling, right? There's plenty of people where I live too that Take COVID as an example. They didn't like the way that COVID was done in public school, so they took them out, and now they're in private school. Like, this is a very open question, but what about this like time is empowering parents to make a more clear decision about avoiding what they consider indoctrination in their kids' lives? Like, again, maybe it's just there's more choice now. Maybe that's functionally it.
I think one of the differences is that it's that idea of like what can ruin a kid or like what can destroy their faith. And that's become a talking point. Because I remember, Scott, I think we were in biology class together. And I remember us feeling like that uncomfortable tug when they were going to teach us evolution.
Oh, yeah.
And and that was the only big thing. And now there's all these other things that people have concerns about. I'm going to super generalize, but there's all these other things. And we could get really specific with the topics if we want, but I'm just going to leave them as general things that people are concerned about.
We know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But I think those have become the things where back when we were in high school, I feel like evolution was the only real like thing that parents were worried about. And again, I'm way overgeneralizing,
sure,
but just for the sake of the conversation, where I think that has empowered the discussion is that there's now all these things, and there's ridiculous stories that you hear that are getting circulated, and I think it has led to this fear of the public school. And again, yeah, we don't send our kids to public school. We homeschool our kids. We've been doing it for long enough now. Where there's a whole again. You said I don't feel the need to defend it. We're doing it. And it is what it is because, there's no going back for us at this point. It'd be really hard for us to go back. But, like, I think that has added to it is, like, that idea of threatening to kids' faith is coming from, they're seeing that where I just didn't see that at all. Like, none of that in high school. None of that in junior. Nope. I never felt that my faith was threatened. And I don't know. I can't tell you because I don't work in a public school and I don't send my kids to public school. But I think that has become a fear that is now over the conversation where I just don't even think my parents thought of that as a reality, where now that has become a reality for a lot of people.
That is totally, yes, I agree I wonder, where did the fear come from? Because that's what I do not understand about where things are at now. Because when like we just described our experience as like Christian kids going to public school and doing prayers, inviting kids to youth group, trying to, maybe I'm wearing a shirt that has a Christian message on it, like, not very overt, but the expectation was, like, you got to be salt and light, and like, there was just no question. It was like, oh, well, if they're gonna teach you something in school like evolution, yikes, then there wasn't a fear response. It was just this is like, you're gonna, you might talk about this, and here's what we think about that. Or I don't know what changed. I don't know how that shifted so dramatically that families are so afraid of what, like we were taught to not fear, I guess, is the point, right? Like, live your faith boldly without fear. You have nothing to be afraid of. And now it's like you have everything to be afraid of. Like, where did families lose the onus to, talk about or like wrestle with questions, have conversations, like have their own values or beliefs or things that they talk about outside of school. And if they talk about it at school, like, why is that so scary? I don't understand that at all.
I think maybe we missed a little bit. Maybe that was happening culturally before our kids were born and we had them in school and that sort of thing. I don't remember a time in my public school where someone was coming up to me like, you're a Christian, you suck. Or, he's kind of like making fun of me that way directly. Sure, were there maybe comments and side eyes and like, oh, you're lame, maybe. Sure, maybe there's a little bit of that.
Yeah.
But I was never like bullied or beat up because I was a Christian. And I think that there's a little bit of that like, hey, culture's against us, which means in public schools, our kids are going to get targeted, that sort of thing. One change that I do see in the dialogue is it's not just that they're teaching evolution. They're teaching evolution in order to deconvert you, in order to convince your kid that Jesus or God isn't real. And that's not the case. They're just teaching it, right? Mm-hmm. They're just teaching sexual health or something like that.
Yeah.
To be clear, my kid is in middle school. He just started 8th grade. He did have topics on sexual health. And you know what? A big part of it was abstinence. And they said in a public school setting, the only real way to prevent STD and pregnancy is abstinence. And I was like, well, Christian me is fine with that.
Right.
Like in a little bit of a mocking way, like that was part of it in a public school. And so I think there's a little bit of when we pull them back, when we create our own bubbles, we start making assumptions about what's going on in those settings, and we have no idea about it. I have no idea about your homeschool setting and what goes on, right? So, I just think that bubble concept is very, very dangerous.
Yeah.
I think we do want to acknowledge that there probably have been situations where Christians have been targeted. I'm sure that has happened.
Of course.
I think that's what gets so difficult about this discussion. And I think I've added this to the disclaimer that we're not going to touch on all these topics. Like, we're just not going to get into them. But I think we can all understand, like, we've probably all seen at some point some news story of some kid who got made fun of for being a Christian, or he can't wear this shirt, or blah, 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 blah. So we do know those things happen, but I think we still, like, I think for all, I'm going to make a generalization about all three of us. Like, I think all of us kind of look back and kind of look at it and feel like it's a little overdone now. So I do want to acknowledge that there probably have been some difficult situations for kids in a school setting where there has been some persecution. I'm using air quotes. The only persecution I ever got, and this is totally a joke, is when I worked at McDonald's, one of the guys I closed with was a big metal guy. And so he would get to choose the music because he was the manager of the kitchen at the night. And he would always choose Cannibal Corpse. And then he would look at me and go, Caleb, I'm going to play satanic music. And then he'd have a good time joking around.
Your soul.
Yeah. Because he knew I was a Christian and he thought it would really bug me. And I was like, man, this bugs me because I don't think it's good, but I'm not offended by your satanic hamburger
Play
music
some
here.
better metal.
Yeah, right. You weren't offended by the lyric. You were offended by the band choice.
Yeah, I'm not a big metal guy. So I just do want to acknowledge that there probably have been those situations, and it's just hard to talk there's so much nuance to this. So I'm just throwing that out there.
Of course.
I think that, like, in everything in life, there's always more complexity.
Yeah.
But I think it's totally, yeah.
But it's not the overarching, like, theme. Like,
no.
The narrative creates, I'm just going to say it, the narrative creates in many Christian circles public school as an enemy or as an antagonist. Yeah. And it's just, I just haven't seen it function, at least in my experience and other people's experience, that way. Certainly people are going to get picked on for that in various circumstances, but maybe not as overt as we are maybe sometimes led to believe.
Yeah, and those are edge cases. I think that's, and I think that too, and not to get too, like, it's basically impossible to talk about this and not, like, pull in, like, the socio-political environment as well, because I think it's the edge cases that get used to fear monger, and it's not the typical experience. But, like, I mean, we live in a country that since its founding has privileged Christians in many different ways, and I that's undeniable. Well, specifically white male Christians, if we want to really get into it, right? But and so those things definitely happen, but that's not the overwhelming environment. Like, persecution is not the environment in public schools. Like, it's unfortunate for somebody, absolutely, but I have a hard time imagining kids these days being, like, really cruel to somebody because they're a Christian. I feel like they'd be like, I don't care.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, I think they go after other things now.
Or they just go after the same things. And maybe this happens in your homeschool, and certainly would happen in private school setting as well. They continue to be kids. They pick on kids for their weight or their looks, or they get into middle school and they learn how to be jerks, which is an absolute thing. And so like maybe some of those things that we prefer to avoid just aren't going to be avoided because that's what happens as kids
Yeah,
grow up.
just
So I
unfortunate cheap shots. Yeah.
yeah, I don't know if those are the same in your circles, but like yeah, it just can't be avoided.
And that's actually one of the reasons that we have preferred the homeschool setting is that we do feel like it's a way to help our kids through that easier. Because like, yeah, there is a more hands-on nature to it. And that's one of the things I've struggled with public school is that I do think you get into a situation where sometimes kids are having to learn how to fight so early because of some of those things because that bullying is real. And
Yep.
like, yeah, I know we've all got to learn to deal with it, but like that is one of my struggles. This has nothing to do with faith. One of my struggles with the public school, and I spent 5 years working in a public school with severely disabled children, and that was one of my things was actually taking of that is like you have kids who by fourth grade have learned such a fight or flight sort of mentality and they live on that edge. I don't think that's healthy. Like that's not a healthy way for a fourth grader to be living because
No.
they're so worried about the bullying that they're
Yeah.
encountering on a daily basis. And so like that's one of the reasons that I like homeschool and is just that hands-on nature. And so yes, there are some other factors, but that's actually much more of a concern I have with the public school sector is how do we manage this? You know, they get to middle school, you said it, you nailed it, Scott, and they turn into jerks. Like should middle schoolers be having to deal with that? Yes, they need to learn how to deal with jerks, but do they need to learn that in middle school out on their own, or is there a better way for them to learn it? And that's actually one of the things I struggle with public schools is just that Lord of the Flies nature that you can
Yeah.
hear about sometimes. And again, I think that's a bit of an edge case, but it's one of those things that I've been concerned with
I
as
would say
well.
that's more of a common experience than like
Yeah,
being quote unquote persecuted for being a
sure,
Christian
for sure,
for sure.
absolutely, I agree.
Oh yeah. Our like a number of years ago, we tried to like go back into the public school system with our oldest in a charter school that was actually 8 through 12. So it was a little different and it was a little bit of a risk, but it seemed like a really good culture, really good setup. And like we're getting ready for high school. Like let's try, like we'd been doing homeschool for a while and had done public school previously. Like let's try this. And it was such an unfortunate, yeah, it was just totally kid culture
Hmm.
at the school. And I think the school up until then was a really well functioning school, and the staff and the teachers just got absolutely steamrolled that year because they had a class of the seventh graders from the previous year who at the lower school were the oldest kids and spent that whole last seventh grade year at home because of
Hmm.
COVID.
Mm,
And now we're going into in this school system, we're going into the upper school, the 8th through 12th. And so they had this incoming class of eighth graders that were just an absolute disaster.
Hmm.
And our daughter just got totally caught up in just the most awful, like toxic, you know, classroom culture from her peers,
Hmm.
like the way teachers were treated. I mean, like the stuff, like just the stuff you hear, like that's probably like a little bit of that's always been true at school, right? But just some of this overwhelming disrespect and just crazy stuff happening there, which are so for our family, in we were able to just a number of weeks in, like we're just going back home
mm,
because this is so unhealthy. It's incredibly detrimental to our kid. And we're already doing homeschool with our other daughter. Like we had the structure to do it, but we did talk about and think a lot about all the families that were part of that school, some of whom it was their kids that were creating a toxic environment, all the kids who were there who were it was detrimental to their learning, who
hmm.
don't have a different choice. Like they're just stuck with
Hmm.
this, and the staff is stuck with it, and teachers are stuck with it. So yeah, that all that stuff is totally real. And as Caleb knows, like if you can do it and it works, there's a lot of benefit to doing school at home, to really accommodating for your kids and providing an
Hmm.
environment and being super flexible. I mean, those are some of the upsides.
And it's not for everybody. I remember a
No.
discussion I had at church once, and this woman was like, she was going out, we were both homeschooling. We had just started. I mean, this was years ago. And I remember she had launched a couple of kids, and she's like, "But who can't homeschool?" And I was like, "Well, a single mom couldn't homeschool, and that's the value
Mm.
for I feel guilty at times for not having my kids in a public school setting because I think my kids could do some good. I think maybe not all my kids and maybe not all in the same age, but like I think about my one of my kids in particular, I think he could do some good. He does not seem to be swayed by other kids very easily. I think he could be a help in a public school setting. I think he could be somebody who other kids could go to, and I think there's a value in that.
Mm-hmm.
In a setting where the it's not out of control, because it sounds like you kind of ran into an out of control setting. Like there is a value in those kids being out in the world and learning some of
Yeah,
those skills outside of that
definitely.
bubble. And
Yep.
that is a fear I have for my kids, that I've
Yep.
bubbled them up, and how are they going to deal with that? Now hopefully we've set them up to do it, but like I do feel like I feel that guilt, and I feel that pressure of like or that tension that my kids have not been outside that bubble much, and they're going to have to learn quickly on their feet. Hopefully they're mature enough to do it. But so I think there is that advantage too of having your kids out there in a public school setting. If they can get that support from the school, and there's maybe enough of a cohort of other youth that they can handle it, that can be an amazing experience as well. That could be a long lasting experience as they navigate some of those things. And that's something that homeschool can't always offer, or maybe even a private school.
Well, I think naturally kids are going to create their own bubbles. They're going to get their friend groups. They're going to
Hmm.
stay in those friend groups. My son certainly does that, and that's fine. That's natural. And
Yeah.
you talk about being in a bubble and homeschool. I think that's the overarching judgment or idea of what homeschool kids are. You're just in a bubble, and what happens when you enter the real world. That's not a fair view of homeschool kids. But also
That's a
too,
fair view.
but I started this conversation with like I hung out with all my youth group kids at school. Like I had
Yeah.
my
Huh.
bubble at school too.
Yeah.
And so that's naturally what's going to happen. And I think, Caleb, what you're saying is like we all have as parents the responsibility to protect our kids and give them the best opportunity to learn. Do we want to completely cut them off from everything? No, it's not healthy for them. But, we all have the ability to make that choice for our families because of the opportunities we're afforded in this country, which is great. But like at some point, how do we judge if a bubble is harmful or not? And
Yeah.
how do we get our kids outside of it?
Yeah. Well, it's one of the first things people ask when they find out you're a homeschool family. If they're kind of like bold, they often will be like, "Well, what do you do for like socialization?" Because I think that's one of the stigmas, right, around homeschool is like there's somehow this universal value to being in like a public school setting where you just have to interact with tons of people your age. True. That's generally true, aside from all these stuff we just talked about where it can actually be bad.
Mm-hmm.
But um, I think there's such a misunderstanding about all of the opportunities that exist. Like just because you're doing school at home, and I mean, certain people's situations can be different and remote and all kinds of things, but generally there's so many ways for the kids to like interact with other kids. Yeah, yeah, maybe float around in a couple different other bubbles, but that's not a challenge, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think what being a parent for me, I've realized is like the individuality of everybody and of my kids is like it ultimately it's very, very, very specific. Like all the decisions that we're making, what we're doing as a family, how we live our life, ultimately it just comes down to who our kids are because they
Mm.
are who they are and they have their individual and complex needs and we're responding to that. And like if I just narrow in on that and kind of like block out other stuff, it all makes sense for the most part. And we try to get them plugged into any number of different opportunities and activities and youth group, and you can do school in different ways that isn't just like sitting by yourself in the corner reading a book. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I guess to your point, Scott, like you can create lots of different bubbles in ways that are good, and
Mm-hmm.
it is interesting. Yeah, it's interesting some of the first comments that come from people who are just like, oh, you don't like our school, or they just assume like you would naturally there's, or how can you do it? Like I could never do that with my kids, or couldn't have with my kids, or
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, how are you going to do high school? There's like lots of that, and it's pretty simple answers to all of those things.
That question that you started with there reminds me of the question when someone asked my vegetarian friends how do they get their protein. Like, dude, there's plenty of ways to do it. You
I've been
can't.
I've been vegetarian for like years at a stretch, and yeah, I know that question.
There you go. It's just a little bit of
Right,
ignorance, which
right.
is
Yeah.
look, okay.
Let me give you a list.
Yeah, exactly,
Let
exactly,
me
and it's
educate you.
quite healthy actually.
Yeah.
But Scott, you have a kid in public school, and you can be just as intentional as well. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, I think that's the other part of it, right? Like, that's kind of the situation I think we've kind of find ourselves in. Like, you can also be intentional in like what you have them plugged into. Like, yeah, there's some of that's lost. So I think that's the other, maybe, I don't know. I feel like when I went off to school, it did feel a little more okay, see ya. Where like maybe I feel like there is that opportunity for more of an intentional public school experience as well. I don't know, is
Mm-hmm.
that true? Or because I just feel like it feels like there's more communication coming back and forth, and there's some of those things that I've kind of heard about with like kind of the way schools are communicating back with parents, where maybe there can be that level that you can get some of that and still provide that opportunity to be out of the bubble,
Right.
in a public school setting, but still be very intentional in it.
Well, I will admit I live in a school district that's always ranked in like the top 3 in the state. So they do things very well. And, they do communicate well. Did that change going from elementary to middle school? Totally. So there was a little bit of shock there. But no, I think, and why I'm a big proponent of public schools and funding these schools is the more money you give to public schools, generally you're giving to people who love to educate and who love kids and who want kids to succeed. And so they're going to create systems to do that. They're not going to take the money and just, be lazy with it. So when you do that and you give them a system and you give them the finances to create a high quality public school setting, you're going to get better communication. You're going to get better opportunities, and you're going to get a variety of opinions that are not antagonistic per se, but just, give people a chance to think about some of this stuff. So it's never been as intimidating as I thought it would be. And to be quite honest, I get emails from, I don't know, there's 3 or 4 emails a week from the principal. I'm just like, delete. Because, I mean, it's not that it's not important. It's just that, especially at this point,
Over communication.
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
exactly there's over communication, which is better than under communication.
It is.
But
Yeah.
and then also too, of course, just there's so much opportunity for those kids to do things when the school is well funded. Whether it is band, whether it is sports, whatever type of communities or clubs are there. Just it's got to be, they got to be given that opportunity, and a lot of people just aren't, DJ, like you were saying before. They just don't have a choice, which is the saddest thing.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
last thing, because we're going very long here. Apologize. What's one thing you want a parent with a kid in an opposite school setting to know about the setting that your kids are in? So like, what's something you want a public school parent or a private school parent to understand about homeschooling? We kind of already talked about the public school thing. Is like, it's not all chaos and it's not just the kids taking over the school. It's a very well-run ecosystem that they've placed these kids into. And I have not honestly run into one teacher and frankly one parent who's like, we're going to target the Christian faith in a public school to demean it. That's not been the case. In fact, There's plenty of clubs. There's a Jesus club, at least there was in elementary school. There's plenty of stuff like that. So I have never thought for one moment that public school is a threatening spot for a Christian in general, in the general context. It's not a purpose of public school to be antagonistic towards it.
Is that your answer to your own question?
It is.
Oh, okay.
Scott just teed it up there.
Which I was giving you guys time to think.
Well,
I know think even when given time.
You went to public schools.
Taught me that.
I just find it unfortunate. I'll throw this in as just a comment before actually answering the question. Based on that, I just find it so unfortunate personally that, like segments of Christianity have been so caught up in, what is often just described as like culture war stuff that it is seen as threatening to the Christian faith to have to like actually affirm other gender identities and like use preferred pronouns and talk about the complexity of humanity in a way that like doesn't bother me, but has become so bothersome and like such an affront, apparently to Christianity that like, though that's what's being put up now as the threat.
Mm-hmm.
I disagree with all of that. But like we said earlier in this conversation, I feel like things have shifted in that way.
Mm-hmm.
But so as a homeschool family, I think, again, like we've kind of said throughout here, I think it's just important for people to understand that there's a lot of complexity involved, and that choice isn't probably necessarily what you generic, not homeschool family looking in may think. And that, I know lots and lots of families that do homeschooling for different reasons, and the reasons are diverse. And it's actually really wonderful and beautiful that there's families that can do like a perfectly great job of educating their kids and providing lots of really interesting life experiences. I mean, we haven't even mentioned the families that will like world school, just travel the world. Like, what a cool privilege if you can travel the world for a year and just learn along the way. I mean, the like people that you can do a lot of really cool things, and it's not always about a retreat. I think that's what always makes me uncomfortable is when alternative school feels like, and I know there are people that are very specifically doing that, and I'm not coming against that. And lots of great friends who are, we don't talk about the reasons. Actually, we just find ourselves in these spaces because our families are, we're doing homeschool for certain reasons. But I think it's important that it's like, it's not always about like opposing things and wanting to kind of like retreat from things that feel threatening. There's lots of really good positive reasons to do it. And sometimes the environment doesn't suit your kid.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can do it differently, that could be a really good thing.
Yeah, especially for the kid in that situation.
Yep.
All right, I'm going to try and answer this quickly, but I'm going to fail. And then I have one other comment after I answer. So I'm going to answer this question by the comment that DJ alluded to, because we get it all the time. Oh, that's so amazing that you can do that. That's like you hear that, you say you're homeschooling, especially my wife gets it. We're homeschooling 4 kids. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's so amazing. She's doing that. I could never do that. First off, I do want to say I am amazed with what my wife does. I know she would feel like she's struggling with it. I think she would say it's really hard. It's a hard thing, and I think she has lots of doubts about what she's doing. And I always say, no, our kids are kids I like being with, which is, I don't like being with anybody, and I like being with those 4 humans a lot. So, I do think like the homeschool moms out there,
yep,
and
rock stars.
Homeschool dads as well. But a lot of the moms take it on. I am amazed at what they do, and I do want to say that my wife is doing a great job, and I'm always impressed. So there you go. If she makes it to the end of this episode, she can hear that. I'm amazed at the job she does. To the comment I get all the time, I hear it, is like, oh, that's so hard. I can't believe you do that. My response always is, you're working just as hard, public school mom who sends her kids to public school. There's different things that you're dealing with. There's different things. There's different battles that you're fighting. There's different burdens that you have to carry. We had to give our oldest child a cell phone because occasionally she was leaving and having to, we needed to be able to get a hold of her. And if we don't have a house phone anymore. So if I gave her my phone, then I stayed home at work. I couldn't get a hold of her because I no longer had a phone. So we had to force a phone upon at the time she was 14. And we didn't have to battle the peer pressure thing. We didn't have to battle that. That is a real fight that I understand the kid's perspective who's saying, I want a phone at 11 because all my friends have a phone at 11. Mm-hmm. That's a legit thing that we never had to deal with because we chose a different battle and we carried a different burden. I don't think that's necessarily a snotty kid who wants a phone because all of his other friends have a phone or her friends do. And you're having to battle that and manage that in a much more complex manner than I am. So I think that's my response always to that is, and what I would want other people on the other side to see is that, no, we're not burdened with more. We're not carrying a bigger load. It's just a different load. Every parent is carrying that burden. Every parent is carrying that load. Ours just looks different than yours, but you are working just as hard just because you didn't decide to homeschool or you decided to go a different route. We're all carrying these immense burdens, and raising kids in this day and age, I think I've said it on the podcast. We have entered the anxiety portion of parenting, in my opinion. And I don't know how you don't do that. I just don't. You are a master of amazing if you are not anxious about your kids and where they're going to go in this world and what they're going to do. And so that's my response to somebody on the other side of it. And then I just want to make one other comment about, I started off and kicked off the conversation with the word indoctrination. I just want to share one quick story of that word and how interesting it is to me. I was sitting in church after church one day, and I'm sitting there talking to this old couple who have launched their children, and they're going on and on about the public schools indoctrinating their kids. Oh my gosh, the indoctrination is so evil. And about 5 minutes later in the conversation, something came up about Sunday school, and they were just like, Sunday school is the best. It's so good. We get to teach kids about Jesus and about God. And I was like, I didn't say it out loud because I don't want to get kicked out of my church. I was like, oh, see, indoctrinating them's good? I'm really confused. Indoctrination, we all do it. Like that's actually what teaching your children is in some respects. It's indoctrinating. It's teaching your kids. So the idea that one version of it is bad and one version of it is good, that messes with my mind a lot. And that's one of my biggest frustrations with that word is because every church, especially big mega churches, they are spending huge amounts of money on their programs that do indoctrination, but that's good indoctrination and we're all for it. So that's why that word has become such a weird buzzword for me.
Good point.
Yeah. Definitely.
DJ, any final thoughts?
It only took me 25 episodes to make a good point, Scott.
Well,
Yes.
I was going to say, I mean, bringing it to the theme of the podcast, I was like, we would all say that youth group in the 90s was some kind of indoctrination. And you're
right.
And yet overwhelmingly, like in the conversation I've had with the two of you and conversation you've had with others, it's like seen as mostly positive. So yeah.
I loved my indoctrination.
Yeah.
Yep. At some point, parents get to choose how they indoctrinate their kids. So it just depends on who you want to put that responsibility on. And no, I appreciate this conversation very much. Again, we are lucky enough to live in places where we have these options. And I think it's important, DJ, you made the point pretty clearly and effectively. Let's be compassionate on those who don't have those options or maybe have to choose a different route for various reasons. We just don't make assumptions, right? Like that's the worst thing to do. And it's easy to do, right? It's easy to do in this context. But at any rate, guys, thanks for joining us for this conversation. We really appreciate it. And listeners, I hope you enjoyed. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to this episode of I Survived Youth Group in the 90s. We hope you enjoyed it. Once again, we want to say thanks to DJ for staying up late with us and talking about education. It was great to have him. And again, hear about his experience with his education back when he was a student, and then kind of about his experience today and the decisions that him and his wife have made for their family. So it was great to talk with him. It's always great to have DJ on. Great guest. So DJ, thanks so much for joining us again to talk about this topic. Let us know what you thought about this show or any of our other shows. You can find us on Twitter at the handle @SurvivedYG. You can always email us at isurvivedyouthgroup@gmail.com. If you are interested in being on the show, you didn't necessarily have to attend our youth group, but if you have your own youth group experience from the 90s or the 2000s, we'd love to connect. In fact, that's one of the things that we're going to start expanding out. We've been talking about this for a while. We started with Five Oaks folks, and we're starting to expand out and kind of collect other people's stories and just want to hear the other experiences that people had in the 90s youth group and kind of how it's impacted your life today. Please subscribe and share the podcast. If you're so inclined, leave a rating or review. If you enjoy this show, you might also enjoy the other podcast that I work on. It's a music podcast called the Album Anniversary Podcast. Over the last couple of years, I've researched and documented the release date of thousands of albums throughout the week. I post about them on social media. I've had a couple different formats on the show, but right now it's just a chance to sit down and talk with somebody about an album that means something to them. We choose one of these albums that's celebrating an anniversary, sit down, talk about it, and celebrate that album. Once again, it's called the Album Anniversary Podcast. The music at the beginning and the end of this show is the instrumental version of the song Positive Charge by the artist Dread Pirate Roberts. Thanks again, and we will talk to you soon.
Quite a few things to talk about here.
I went to school. You might not know it from listening to me talk.
Could have fooled me. You immediately went to a Southern accent.
I even went to college.
You did.
I know. Like, what does that say about
Yes.
the
I went to Stout, the high school after high school.
I forgot about that.
13th grade?
It's actually a Mystery Science Theater 3000 joke about Iowa State, but I stole it.
First
It's
Oh.
like it's too perfect for Stout to describe Stout.
Iowa State, the alma mater of my parents.
and my
Ouch.
brother.
Yes, right.
And my brother. So
Oh,
It's one of the things that's DJ for off the record. It's one of the things my wife has pushed back, and she's like, "Sometimes you guys don't cover the other side of it." And I'm like, "Yeah, because it's our show. You start your own show if you want to cover the other side of it."
yeah.